We'll just connect to the cloud server. So we've got a recording here. All right, fantastic. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining tonight. I know most of you guys here tonight, but if I haven't met any of you before, my name is Regan McCaffrey, so I'm the fine wine manager at Glengarry. And this tasting is going to be a real pleasure for me to present to you guys. Hopefully it'll be a pleasure for you guys to drink along with me as well, because we're going to be trying certainly one, if not two, of the world's greatest wineries tonight. I'm especially excited to present the wines of AALTO to you because I remember when we first started importing these wines and tasting them for the first time and just being how impressed I was, having never tasted anything with this kind of concentration, power, but also elegance and balance from Ribera del Duero before. So it's pretty exciting. So we've only got 6 wines, so it's not going to be a hugely long tasting, but I'll try and go into some depth about the wines that we're going to be tasting tonight as well, and we can take a little bit of time with them. So hopefully you guys opened kind of those mini bottles a little bit beforehand. You'll see the reason I gave that instruction as we go through, because these are wines that have a huge life ahead of them, massive longevity. If you haven't opened those little bottles now, and you've got 2 flights of 3, so you'll see on each bottle, if you haven't done one of these before, it'll say flight 1, glass 1, flight 1, glass 2, etc. So what you can do is set up your 3 glasses on your tasting mat and pour in, if you haven't already, flight 1. So you've got glass 1, glass 2, and glass 3. Clearly a white wine in glass number 1, and then 2 reds. So we're going to be starting with an Albariño, and then into the Tempranillos from AALTO. So I'll give you guys a second to get that together. All right. Now, wine number 1, there's a reason why I put this wine in here, is that I specifically wanted to taste this wine because we've had it for a while. We've had it for about 6 months. I still haven't tried it. It's the most expensive Albariño that we have in the shop, and it's from one of the most respected producers in Rías Baixas. So this was a wine I really wanted to try. So I've got a bit of a presentation as we go through here, guys. So hopefully you guys will be able to see it. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll move to the presentation so you can see what we're talking about and where exactly we are. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that map up on their screen now. So we're looking at Spain, and Spain is one of the oldest wine producing countries in the world, and certainly one of the largest in terms of volume as well. But what we're looking at tonight is very much at the high quality end of the spectrum. So if you've been to Spain, you've probably been to Barcelona. You can see Barcelona over on the right-hand side there. Inland from Barcelona, in that red area there, you can see like Tarragona, Montsant, Priorat. A lot of the top wines we import come from around that region as well. Cava, just north of that. You'll see Madrid in the center of Spain there. Just north of Madrid, you'll see in that green area there is Ribera del Duero. And that's where we're going to be concentrating most of the tasting tonight. But where we're going to be starting, first of all, I'm not sure whether I can, whether you guys can see my pointer here. Can you see that? Oliver, do you want to give me a thumbs up if you can see that pointer moving on the screen? I'm not sure if you guys can see that pointer or not, but this is where we're starting up here. We're starting up in Galicia, and we're starting in the region of Rías Baixas. Rías Baixas is most probably famous for its Albariños. The producer who we're looking at is Pazo Barrantes. And you can see an extremely old producer indeed, established in 1511. And this is a producer that in fact is actually owned by the very famous producer in Rioja, Marqués de Murieta. And a lot of you guys will know their top Rioja Castillo Ige from that. And one would think that Pazo de Barrantes is kind of a subsidiary of Marqués de Murieta, being such a famous estate, but it's actually the other way around. Marqués de Murieta was purchased by the Cibrian family, by Vicente Cibrian. He purchased it in 1983 in a very, very large auction against a lot of other large wine groups. And so he and his family have owned Marques de Murrieta since 1983. But Pazo de Barrantes is the family's personal estate. And they descend from a series of counts, the Counts de Sisal. And the Counts de Sisal and the Cibrian family have owned Pazo de Barrantes since 1511. They've been situated on the same property since that same time, and they've been grape growing for much of that time period as well. So it's an extremely old property. Now you would have seen on that, that previous slide, we're very, very close to the Atlantic coast here. And you get a lot of cool winds coming in off the Atlantic, but then you've got a lot of very, very hot weather where they are just slightly inland as well. So see if we move to this next slide here. Pazo de Barrantes, that's the original building there. I think the original building was built, they started building around about 1511. This building was from about 1650, the original bones of it. And the family still lives in some of the old sections that, that they were in originally. Now, it's not a particularly large estate. It's got about 12 hectares of entirely Albariño. They don't make anything else but Albariño. You'll see in this, this next slide, on the left here, there's Vicente Cibrian. So he's the owner, of course, of Marques de Murrieta and Pazo de Barrantes. And on the right there, we've got the head winemaker, Maria Vargas, and she's the head winemaker for the entire group. So she also makes, in fact, you can see just behind her shoulder there, there looks like a Magnum or a 3-litre bottle of Castillo Ige Rioja. So she's the head winemaker, not only for Marques de Murrieta, but also for Pazo de Barrantes. So she, of course, is based in Rioja and makes her way up. She's been working with them for about 25 years now, but makes frequent visits up to Barrantes, and then has an assistant winemaker who's based in the winery the entire time. Now, that's the variety that we're looking at here, and that's how they grow Albariño in the region. And it's a very, very different way of growing it. It's a very traditional way of growing it. They call it a parel trellis system. It's a local tradition to guard against rot and mildew by lifting, of course, the vines up on this raised trellis. So you've got lots of air flowing in underneath there. Also assists the ripening as well. Now, the soils that we're looking at here in Rías Baixas, very shallow soils, very sandy soils, and very, very acidic soils, and very, very low yields from this as well. Now, you saw what would have seen, I think, the famous 3-clog crest at the start there. That comes from one of the original families, the Zapata family, who owned it as well. And if we look at the bottle of La Comtesse that we're going to be tasting, you'll see the 3 clogs there in the center, and around the outside you'll see the famous seashells, because we're right here on the coast. Seafood, seashells. Albariño is very much a wine that they drink in this region with seafood on a regular basis, and there's a lot of fossilized seashells in the soils here as well. Now, this is a wine that they haven't been making for a very, very long time. I think 2009 was the first vintage of La Comtesse. We're tasting the 2016 tonight, and this is certainly one of the most expensive Albariños in Spain. So if you haven't already, I've only had a very, very small taste. Let's take a minute and give it a try. Mine certainly came out of the fridge a little bit cold. So the more you can warm it up in the glass, the more it's going to open up as well. Now, you probably haven't tasted an Albariño like that before. I certainly haven't had one like that in a very, very long time. And that's a good example of the Pazo Barrantes style, which is extremely rich, extremely concentrated, certainly at this level with La Comtesse. But then you see that massive acidity coming through at the end, keeping it all together. It's got the kind of acidity that you might see in a in a Chenin Blanc or a Riesling, but then a much different flavor profile up front. Huge weight as well, and lots of concentration. So La Comtesse was something that they only started in 2009 from a very, very particular vineyard, a single vineyard called the Cachero vineyard, which is a really, really old vine plot that they have there. The vines, youngest vines on the plot, 40 years of age, oldest vines on the plot, 60 years of age. So some very, very old Albariño. This is all in the Salnus Valley here. All, of course, manual harvesting, 18 kilogram cases. They do destem the Albariño when this comes in before pressing for this particular wine. They don't always do that. Very, very gentle pressing. Now, the thing with this wine, as opposed to some of the other Albariños from Pazo Barrantes or from some other producers, is, of course, the oak. And you can see that on the label there where it talks about the fermentation. So the fermentation takes place in very, very large vats of French Allier oak. I think they're a 3,000 litre vat. So a little bit similar to a German Fuder, that kind of size of barrel. And that fermentation takes place over 60 days. So it's quite a long fermentation as well. And they leave the wine in contact with the fine lees within that vat for about 4 months as well. And that's to increase that texture and that mouthfeel on the palate there as well. Then what they do is La Comtesse stays in that vat for a further 12 months and then moves from there to concrete tank for another 10 months. So this is an Albariño that's had a huge amount of aging time. The 2016 that we're trying here, this is the current release from them as well. As you see there, they made 12,240 bottles. So it's individually numbered. This is a pretty limited batch for us. I believe that we only got 12 bottles of this in. We sold the first 6 pretty quickly, and I kept the second 6 back so that we can actually put it in a tasting so I could actually try it, which is what I wanted to do. Now, the pairing that they recommend with this wine is a scarlet shrimp tartare. Sounds very nice. With its coral and a Capellania white reserve sauce, or perhaps scallops, or Norway lobster risotto with some crispy bacon and some butter, or clams directly in their juice, with some Pazo de Barrantes, Albariño, lime, grapefruit kind of squeezed over the top. So that gives you a good idea of the kind of type of food that they're eating in this region, being very, very close to the sea. And I think that Albariño is also a great variety that really suits the kind of food that we eat here in New Zealand in the summertime as well. It's pretty exciting stuff. And this is a hugely high scoring wine as well. I think somewhere between kind of 94 and 98 points for most of the big critics out there. One that I hadn't tried before. I was surprised by the concentration of this wine. You don't always see this kind of concentration there, but you can see where the price comes from in this. It's also a wine that Pazo de Barrantes, as they move through over time, this is a wine they are intending to be aged. They've given it a little bit of aging time to start with, but this is a wine that they want you to continue to age in the cellar. For at least 10 years, they said, from vintage, this will last. If not longer, I suspect it will last significantly longer than that. When you look at the acidity that's kind of sitting in that wine there. But very, very impressive. Any thoughts out there on that wine? Anyone trying an Albariño for the first time? This is certainly not your standard. Stephen, any thoughts on that one? I've got some notes here from the winemaker who said that the reason they've done this extending aging the bottle is to let all of the talents harmonize and reach the full potential of the Albariño grape. If there's anything I've learned over the years working with Albariño, Maria Vargas says, is that this wine evolves incredibly over time, producing a unique personality, combining the delicacy and elegance with its concentration, its vigor, and its complexity. And you see that, I mean, as a producer who only makes Albariño, they really believe in this variety, hugely popular in northern Spain, starting to gain a little bit of traction here in New Zealand. There's a few people making some of these wines here, but we'll see. I think that there's definitely potential for growing Albariño in New Zealand. Yeah. All right, hopefully you guys can all see me again. Any thoughts on that, that wine out there? No? Anyone love it? Anyone hate it?
We're muted. Regan, do you know that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, yeah. You guys just, sorry, you guys just need to unmute yourself if we're having a little chat. Yeah, I've automatically muted everyone just so it's a little bit quieter. Yep. What do you think there, Stephen?
Yeah, no, I thought, as you say, just that amazing concentration initially, and then that lovely acidity. And I couldn't believe how long the finish was.
Yeah, super long.
Certainly not like any Albariño I've tasted before.
Yeah. We all had a go at putting stuff in chat, Regan.
Oh, I can see you now. Yeah, I couldn't see the chat while I had the screen sharing up. I'm new to the technical side of this one, Anne-Marie. All right, fantastic. All right, so we're going to move on to AALTO now, and I've certainly got a few different glasses here. I've got my holding glasses that I'm holding them in, and then I've got my Tempranillo glass that I'm going to be trying them out of. So hopefully you guys have got a few different glasses there as well. I think probably as a standard glass, the Syrah glass, certainly from Riedel and most producers, is probably a little bit better than the Cabernet glass. If you did have a Syrah glass there, just a little bit more tapered at the top. But otherwise, your standard Cabernet or your big red Shiraz glass is probably going to work pretty well. All right. So let's move on to this, and we'll see at where we're looking at now. All right, so we were up on the Atlantic coast in Rías Baixas. Now we're moving to Ribera del Duero, directly above Madrid. You'll see it's a reasonably large area. Not particularly small, a region that perhaps has certainly not been as well known in the past as somewhere like Rioja, but more recently it's really starting to gain a lot of acclaim. It's become very, very famous, and some fantastic wines coming out of that region. Let's just jump forward here. All right, AALTO. A winery that I first came across when we first started bringing it in, which probably now would have been about 7 or 8 years ago. I think we got a little bit of the 2009 vintage, but it was really the first vintage was the 2010 that I was really impressed with. And this is a winery that is almost a modern version of one of the most famous wineries in Spain. And a winery that perhaps is the most well known, and that is, of course, is Vega Sicilia. And Vega Sicilia, the winemaker for 30 years up to 1999 was this man you can see on the screen here. So that's a man called Mariano García. And so he was the winemaker 1969 through to 1999, I believe, at Vega Sicilia. He made a lot of the top wines there. And you'll see Vega there, really the first of the great Spanish wineries to gain international acclaim. Started around about 1854, and when this started in Ribera del Duero, of course, Tempranillo was the base grape, but the original owner there was one of the first import French varieties into Ribera del Duero. In the old days, it used to have a little bit of Merlot, a little bit of Malbec in it as well. But really Cabernet Sauvignon was the major international grape variety or French grape variety that Vega Sicilia was blending with the local Tempranillo. And the most famous wine of Vega Sicilia is, of course, Unico. And it's still probably the most famous wine in Spain to this day. You can see some very old vintages there, 1948, 64, 41. And Unico is around about, in most vintages, around about 90% Tempranillo as the major indigenous grape variety of Ribera del Duero, and about 10% Cabernet Sauvignon today. When you look back at some of these older vintages, it would have had a little bit of Merlot in it, sometimes some Malbec and some other things as well during that kind of time period as well. But Unico is probably most famous for being a wine that has incredible aging potential. In the past, certainly it was aged for at least 10 years before it was released, generally all of that time period in wood. And then it was a wine that could age 50 or 60 plus years after that point as well. And still, if you ask a lot of wine collectors who perhaps don't drink a lot of Spanish wine, but drink a lot of very classical French or Italian wines, they will all know Unico because it's been famous for such a long time. And what happened was Mariano García had been there for 30 years and had pretty much done all he wanted to do there. Not only had he produced the wines of Vega Sicilia for a long time, he was also involved in setting up their new winery, which was a winery called Helm. So Vega Sicilia itself had a second wine, a vine called Valbuena, but then they set up in around about the mid-1980s a winery called Helm, which was dedicated to just producing wines, Ribera del Duero from Tempranillo, and producing them in a more modern style. So certainly the style of Vega Sicilia and Unico was extended aging for a very, very long time, up to a decade in wood, but almost no new wood, aged wood, lots of very, very large barrels, large vats as well, whereas Helm was a more modern style, starting to use some new American oak, some new French oak, and really create a new kind of lift and a new footprint for Ribera del Duero. And at the time when Helm started, it was certainly seen as a very modern style Ribera del Duero. Nowadays, it's seen as a very classical style. And the wines we're about to try tonight are the new modern style out of the region. So this is a very, very nice map that you can see looking across Ribera del Duero. And you can see it's very, very long. Not particularly tall, and there's certainly some similarities with Burgundy. You can imagine if you turned this entire map on its side and it was running north to south, you're kind of looking at an area about the size of the Côte d'Or. And all those little regions there, we can see these little grape parcels. These are the different villages where AALTO is getting their grape sources from. So they source their grapes from about 9 different villages across the region. And I don't know if you can see my pointer, but this is where AALTO themselves are based, down near Arriba. And that's where their home vineyard is as well, which has some of their youngest vines. They planted that when they started. And there you can see Mariano García on the right-hand side there, and his partner, a guy called Javier Zaccandini, which sounds a little bit more Italian, I think, than it sounds Spanish. Now, I think you guys are probably getting a little bit thirsty. We're gonna talk obviously more about the wines as we go through, but why don't we have a sip of the wine in glass number 2, just so we know, you know what kind of we're in for tonight. So this is the AALTO Ribera del Duero 2017 as your first red. So that's glass number 2. So let's give that a taste, and then we'll talk a little bit more about these two. Now, wow, it's actually been a little bit of time since I had AALTO. I hadn't actually tasted any of these wines before the tasting, and I haven't had some in a while, and that's a flavor that I missed. Very, very fantastic wine, I think. Now, Mariano García on the right and Javier on the left. In less than just over 20 years now, they really achieved their goal, which was to make a wine in Ribera del Duero that was equal to the world's best. They wanted to do that in 20 years. They probably got there in less than 15. So they had a very, very impressive job. Now, what they did as a pair of them, you had Mariano García. He was both the winemaker and the technical director for 30 years for Vega Sicilia. And Javier was the director for 6 years of the regulatory council of the Ribera del Duero DO. So he dealt with all of the different winemakers across the region, knew where all of the best vineyards were, what kind of yields were coming in from all of the different plots. So he was a man with a huge amount of information out there. So they really wanted to bring those two things together. You had Javier, who had the information on the vineyards, and you had Mariano, who really knew how to make some of the greatest wines in the world already and was looking for a new challenge. He'd been with Vega Sicilia for so long, he wanted to do something new. And this is the kind of landscape that we're talking about here in Ribera del Duero. Especially here, this is actually the view when we're looking out from the winery. It's a little bit like the landscape of a spaghetti western. You can see it looks a little bit faded out because the sun here is absolutely intense. It gets extremely hot, well into the 40s during summertime here, but it can also snow as well during the wintertime. So it's a climate of some real extremes. Got an interesting point here. You had the white hair and silver beard plus the gold chain that Mariano has around his neck. The word debonair could have been invented for him, and apparently is an extremely charming winemaker, as well as all of the ladies have attested to when they visit here. He's got a lot of old school Spanish charm. And then Javier has an MBA, speaks 4 languages. His partner's a classical musician. Classical music's really the soundtrack to his life. And the two of them coming together have got different points of view of coming together, but they came together bringing their energy together and bringing a huge amount of money as well. If you look at the experience that they brought with them, they were able to get some extensive backing from some very, very large wineries and investors to invest in the winery itself. Here you can see some of the younger vines of Tempranillo. Now, in the region itself, the local version of Tempranillo, because you find Tempranillo all across Spain, but in Ribera del Duero, it's known as Tinto Fino. So Tinto Fino is what you can see here. And those are some of the younger vines. Those were planted when they started the winery. So those are only around about 20 years old now. And there's the winery building itself. Now, the winery building that we can see there, that's reasonably new. That was only built or refurbished certainly in 2015. They've been on the same spot since then. But when they started, all of the money went into the winemaking and the winemaking equipment. It was very much a huge focus on quality. There wasn't much of a focus on receiving visitors and looking good. But they've been so successful that has certainly changed over time. And now it's an incredibly impressive winery to visit as well. Here's a view from up on top of the roof there, looking across some of the gardens, some of the pool that thermoregulates the temperature underneath there, looking out across some of those young vines there. And then you can see the pool on the roof there, not for swimming in, it's the temperature. In fact, what it does, that sits directly above the barrel hall. And so that helps regulate the temperature because of the extremes during both summertime and wintertime. That helps regulate the temperature underneath in the barrel hall, even though that's temperature controlled down there. This just helps stop some of those extremes, means they don't need to use so much power. So it's a really, really interesting winery. It's quite an eco winery as well. But you can see now in that winery, they have been very, very successful, and they have a lot of money to throw around. So it's now one of the premier places to certainly visit in Ribera del Duero. I think you can visit as a private individual, but they're mostly there to receive professionals as they come in from all over the world. And even though Javier isn't the head of the DO for Ribera del Duero anymore, he's still very, very well respected in that sense as well. And there's a great view of the winery from above and the vines that we've got down there. All right, so we've got two vintages of AALTO in front of us here. And the left glass was the 2017, and in the right glass was the 2016. So we've tried the 2017 already. Let's give the 2016 a try, and then we'll come back together and we'll talk a little bit about the winemaking of these wines. All right, hopefully you guys will be able to hear this as I share here, but I'm going to share a little video with you so you can get an idea of where we are here. Looking at the vineyard itself. So it is in Spanish, but luckily there's subtitles.
Regan, there's a video playing.
Yes, can you guys see it?
Not here.
Not here, Regan.
No.
Okay, let's see if we can share that again. Okay, can you see that now?
Yep.
All right, let's try that again. Hopefully you guys should be able to see that now.
Bodegas AALTO, ubicada en la provincia de Valladolid, extiende sus diferentes viñedos por 9 municipios dentro de la Ribera del Duero.
Y dentro de la ribera pues, nos encontramos una diversidad de suelos grandísima, que podemos hablar de las zonas más calcáreas en la provincia de Valladolid a un montón de suelos de origen aluvial en la provincia de Burgos, lo cual nos da una diversidad muy grande a la hora de poder trabajar. Nosotros realmente lo que hacemos es un vino de terruño formado con diferentes terruños dentro de la ribera. Toda la uva llega por separado a la bodega, se procesa por separado y se elabora por separado de función del origen de cada uva. Esa diferenciación lo llevamos hasta la crianza, de modo que cada zona y cada partida le trabajamos de modo que sea lo más interesante para conseguir la mejor calidad y las mejores características de cada vino. El clima de toda esta zona es un clima totalmente continental, podríamos decir casi extremo, es decir, tenemos veranos e inviernos secos, inviernos muy fríos, veranos muy cálidos, donde tenemos integrales térmicas día y noche que pueden llegar a una diferencia de unos 20-25 grados.
Un diseño moderno en el que la gravedad reduce al máximo la manipulación de la uva en el proceso de convertirse en vino.
Y el proyecto fue realizado por el arquitecto Chus Manzanares Había hecho algunas otras cuantas bodegas en España, muy interesantes, junto al equipo técnico de la bodega que fuimos dirigiendo cómo queríamos trabajar y cómo en cada zona lo que queríamos.
El edificio consta de 5 plantas, 2 exteriores, donde se encuentran la nave de procesado de uva y la nave de fermentación, y 3 bajo tierra, donde están las naves de crianza y el botellero. En alto, las naves de crianza están enterradas. La sala tiene controles de climatización para mantener la temperatura y la humedad lo más homogéneas posible durante todo el año.
Aquí ya lo que termina haciéndose es la crianza del vino. Una vez que el vino hemos acabado la fermentación alcohólica y la malolactica, el vino pasa a su periodo de crianza en barrica. Es una fase muy importante para el vino en el que hacemos que el vino madure, que tome las características que buscamos antes de su embotellado y salir al mercado. Y esta es la fase en la que la climatización de la sala y el control de temperatura y humedad es más importante. Porque hay un dicho que dice que el mayor ladrón de una bodega es la barrica. Las barricas pierden en torno a un 4 a un 6% por evaporación al año. Si las condiciones de la sala no son una buena refrigeración y sobre todo también una buena humidificación, ese porcentaje se eleva. Por eso es muy importante, sobre todo ya en esta fase, el control de las salas. El techo está protegido en el exterior por construcción y por un pequeño estanque con agua que nos termorregula la temperatura tanto en invierno como en verano. En bodega enterrada ya ellos mismos tienen mayor regulación, con lo cual el gasto y la inversión en climatizarla a lo largo del año es menor. Y el ahorro energético es bueno para la empresa, pues es un ahorro en costes y además también muy interesante a nivel medioambiental.
A 16 metros por debajo de donde entra la uva, sale el vino ya terminado, etiquetado y en sus cajas, cerrando así el ciclo de su elaboración.
Nosotros en Alto elaboramos 2 vinos, que son el Alto, que es la mezcla de todos los pueblos que trabajamos, y el PS, que es la selección de las mejores viñas.
All right, we got there in the end. Hopefully you guys could have seen all of that. Absolutely incredible winery to visit. So as you can see, it's almost 20 meters tall and everything there is done by gravity. So there's no need to pump any of the juice at any stage. Everything comes in the very, very top of the winery, gravity fed all the way down at every different stage until the final end where it's bottled, packed all on site, right down at the bottom in the basement, underground. And then comes out the backside. So the 2 wines we've got in front of us here, both the white label AALTO 2017 and 2016. And as you could see, as the vineyard manager said there, AALTO itself is a winery that only makes 2 wines. They just make the AALTO itself, which is a blend of all of the 9 villages across the region. And then you've got the AALTO PS, the Selection Pagodianes, which basically means the special selection, which generally comes from just 2 plots, sometimes with a 3rd plot in, but is the oldest vines from across the region as well. They only work with 1 variety at AALTO, and that's just Tinto Fino, so just Tempranillo. So they're very, very much just about that single variety. Now, some people have asked about the name as well. Well, certainly they were very much about simplicity, being only from 1 region, from only 1 grape variety. And they really, really loved the design elements of the Finnish architect, AALTO as well. And they came up with the idea that if they called the winery AALTO with a double A, then in every wine list, in every restaurant, in every wine list, certainly at every retailer, it would always be the very, very first wine in the list because it had 2 A's in the name. So they thought that was a little bit funny, and that's where the name itself, AALTO, came from. But you can see certainly with the design elements of the vineyard itself and the winery, they're very much about that simplicity. Right. So So the two wines we've got in front of us here, AALTO, from 9 different villages across the region. We've got 2 vintages here, 2017 and 2016. And one of these vintages, the first one, 2017, was a very, very difficult vintage. There was a lot of frost, a lot of extremely heavy frost, which is a little bit unusual in this region. Some producers lost up to 90% of their crop. So a very, very difficult year. AALTO, I think, had about 30% less than average because they spent a lot of money on frost fighting in this particular year. And then the 2016 in our second glass is certainly an iconic vintage for the region, for Ribera del Duero. Extreme power and elegance combined. Now, how these two particular wines have been made. So the grapes that go into AALTO, into this particular blend, the vines are very, very old. So everything that goes into here is very old. Primarily 40 years of age to 80 years of age. They do have some young vines that go into this from that vineyard directly in front of the winery itself that they own. And those are around about 20 years of age now, just a little bit over 20 years of age. But almost all of the grapes otherwise that go into this are between 40 and 80. So very, very old vine Tempranillo. And because it comes from all 9 of the different villages within the region, you get a lot of complexity. And the reason for that is that this was a region that was very, very old school Spanish. They didn't do a lot of sharing. And so all of the different sub-regions within Ribera del Duero had their favorite kind of version of Tinto Fino, of Tempranillo. And the local regions tended to do a Marsal selection. And basically what that means is that over time, over the centuries, they've taken the cuttings of the best plants and they've taken those cuttings and they've replanted the vineyards with those, but they haven't shared those cuttings outside of their own little particular part of the region. And so what you've ended up with is all of these different little sub-regions within Ribera del Duero, each ending up with slightly different different clones and styles. Oh, we're just got to watch out the cats wanting to jump up on the keyboard there. We don't want that. So yeah, they've all got slightly different clones of Tinto Fino, and that's where a lot of the complexity comes from, as well as the different soil types across the region as well. Now, of course, the harvest for AALTO from all of the different vineyards is always entirely done by hand. They have small little boxes of 15 kilos. And when everything comes in, everything is very much all inspected by hand as well. So it comes in on a, they put everything by hand into the big rotor machine, runs over the top and runs down the inspection lines. And it runs past a number of different lines for it to be inspected, individual berries taken out at this stage as well. Now, you notice the oak on this, some very, very high quality oak in this. The regular AALTO that we're trying here is always a blend of both French oak and American oak. And that's a very modern way of doing it. It certainly wasn't done like that in the past. If we looked at somewhere like Rioja, traditionally they always used American oak in that region, and some very, very old American oak because they couldn't afford new oak. But here in Ribera, it's been more a tradition for French oak, certainly over the last 50 years. But here they're blending both French and American together, and it's 50% new. So 50% of the French barrels are new oak, 50% of the American barrels are new oak. Everything else is between 1 and 3 years old. So there's nothing particularly old here. These are all regular sized barrels. We're not talking any large vats, any tonneau, any food or anything like that. They're reasonably young barrels and from very, very high quality producers as well. All of the malolactic fermentation happens in those barrels as well. And they sit in there. In this particular one, certainly in the 2017, had 16 months in those barrels. And then on the 2017, that had 17 months in those barrels. And if you look at that, say that 2017, yeah, bottled July 2018, both of these wines at 14.5% alcohol, which is reasonably high alcohol, but you'll notice that it doesn't kind of come across that way because these wines are so balanced. I'll see if I can show you some of the vineyards that these particular wines come from here. So let's have a look at some of the old vine Tempranillo. Hopefully you guys can see that now. Oh. All right, there's the Alto. All right, there's a good look at some Tempranillo from a very, very old vine from one of their oldest vineyards there. And you can see that vine looks more like the trunk of a tree than it does like some of the vines that we look at here. You can see those grapes just going through veraison, just a couple of green grapes still there. Most of them just starting to change, starting to get a little bit darker. And there's a really, really good picture of some Tempranillo that's starting to get very, very close to full ripeness there. It's sagging on the vine there as well. All right, this next map, you'll see again across the entire region there, and you'll see where Alto is based down there at Quintanilla de Arriba, Valbuena de Duero. You can see to the left, that's where Vega Sicilia is based, and that's of course where the name Valbuena comes from. But when you see all of those different vineyards across the region there, you can see that they're pulling from most different places across the region. You can see La Jora in the center there. That's one of the oldest vineyards that they have. At one stage, the vines there were 100 years old. I think they're down to about 90 years of age as well at the moment now. So we'll have a look at some of the different vineyards. All right, so Valbuena de Duero, very, very famous vineyard there. That's of course one of the vineyards where Vega Sicilia is pulling their wines for, and a very, very old vineyard as well. Some of a lot have been replanting there over recent years, but it's been very, very famous vineyard for a long time. Quintanilla de Arriba at the bottom there. So we're looking left to right here. So at the top there is Valbuena de Duero. At the bottom is Quintanilla de Arriba. And Quintanilla de Arriba is right where Alto is based. And you see it says the personality of limestone. And when we were looking at those pictures of looking out from the vineyard before, you could see all of those really strong bands of limestone in all of the hills all around there. Very, very well draining as well. And you can see we're at a reasonable altitude as well here. We're at 800 meters, and that's probably the youngest vineyard that they own at kind of 20 to 25 years of age. Abajo with the red clay, also about at 800 meters. This is as we're working our way across the map here. So we're working our way from west to east. That's also where a lot of the younger vines come from as well. And Alto also owns that vineyard itself. Now, they've got around about, I think, 110, 120 hectares now. Yeah, 110 hectares. And they only own a few of those. Most of them are under very, very long-term contracts with local growers because these are such old vineyards. Of the 200 plots from the 9 villages, none of the plots is bigger than a hectare. So a hectare is around about the size of Eden Park if you just looked at the field, so not particularly large. So 200 plots, all about the size at a maximum of a football field. So they're all quite small. Now, bottom right there, you can see those are some extremely old vines, La Jora Roa, and that's where a large proportion of the fruit comes for the AALTO PS that we're going to be trying next. You can see reddish brown, loamy, sandy clay, deep gravels. It's a pretty shallow slope there, a little bit higher at 850 meters. But all of the best fruit from there, that vineyard always goes into AALTO PS, very, very old vines. Right, then in the top left there, Argaleda, that vineyard also always goes into AALTO PS. And you can see they are very much bush vines. They're just growing wild on the ground there. There's no trellising or anything here. This is very much the traditional way of doing it. That's kind of quite sandy on top, and you can see in between the kind of the vague rows there, very sandy soil. There is clay and stone further on down, but that's quite deep down. Then we're at 900 meters now. So you can see as we're moving from west to east across Ribera del Duero, we're gradually getting higher and higher. Morrodillo, quite stony, starting to get now, glacial rocks, alluvial rocks, more extreme weather up here as we're starting to get a little bit higher, 950 meters now. And so we've gone from 800 meters up to 950. So it's pretty serious, the difference in climate between these vineyards as we start to move over to the eastern section of Ribera. Frenillo, up on the left there, and you can see again bush vines, some very, very old vines here, 70, 80-year-old bush vines. 850 meters, soft sandy sandstone soils. And this is a vineyard that has gone into AALTO PS across certain different vintages. It's in the 2016 that we're going to be trying tonight. But before then, it hasn't been included since 2012. It was in the 2010, the 2011, and the 2012. But then they didn't put it back in again until 2016. Banos, the final one we're looking at there at the moment. A little bit fresher, more elegant style of Tinto Fino. Various cut old terraces, very deep soils, clay, sandy, and it's really rocky here, up quite high, 900 meters. Here, if you put your hand into the soil, you can dig down with your fingers and you can start to reach some of the rock here. So the vines have to work very, very hard here to dig their way in. You can see there's quite a difference across the different vineyards that they have there. That's them pouring the grapes into the very top as they come into the winery. Of course, all gravity fed, so it comes in the very, very top of the winery there. Looking at some of those new fermenters, and you can see they've got some wooden fermenters there as well. And there's some lovely new French oak barrels. All right, you guys can unmute yourself as you like, but if you haven't tried any wines from AALTO ever before, anyone who's never tried an AALTO wine before, what are your thoughts on those first two?
Well, I've definitely tried AALTO before, but I just thought really interesting seeing the difference between the vintages. You know, massive difference to me. That 17 was just a lot lighter.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that 16 and just that power and that concentration. Yeah, just really interesting.
Yeah, you can see what a great vintage that 2016 is. So, I mean, I think most people would say that 2017 is a winemaker's vineyard, winemaker's vintage. I read that the frosts were described as brutal, late April frosts in many places, drastic reduction in yields as we talked about. And a lot of producers actually were left scrambling to purchase bulk grapes from other producers or other growers out there just to be able to keep their barrels full and the doors open. Because look, when you've lost 90% of your crop, it's pretty difficult. Those fortunate enough to have their own vineyards, enough money like AALTO does to do the frost fighting and to buy from some of these very, very old vineyards. Old vineyards are much more resistant to frost than young vines as well. So AALTO was very, very lucky in that sense, only losing say 30 to 35% of the crop versus that 80, 90% from some people. So you can see, I mean, they were still able to produce a wine that I think for most regions you would describe as incredibly concentrated, but for AALTO, I think the 2017 is quite a delicate, kind of approachable AALTO. From from some producers, I would say that you need to be a little bit careful from 2017, depending on what style of Ribera del Duero you want. But you can see AALTO still manages to do very, very well on a vintage like that. As opposed to this 2016, which just going back to here, I was looking at some of the notes from the Wine Advocate, and they said that they thought that 2016 could be the best vintage of modern times in Ribera del Duero. Generally pretty moderate temperature-wise, pretty even fruit set, above average yields, you know, so there wasn't a huge amount of fruit, but it definitely wasn't small. But the wines are graceful, they're elegant, they've got massive concentration and that kind of multi-dimensional flair that you get from a really, really great vintage. As most of you guys will know, across all of Europe, certainly in France, 2016 was a stunning vintage, both in Bordeaux, Burgundy. It was a great vintage in Rioja as well. So if you're looking for really top wines from all of the old regions in Europe, 2016 is a very, very safe bet. It was just such a great year. Never got too hot, but it got hot enough, and it was just perfect temperatures all through the picking season. And really that was across all of Western Europe. Oh yeah, it's just a beautiful wine on the nose.
I mean, to me, it was a lot more obvious that American oak on the 2017. I'm interested to see whether the oak regime was the same, and it's just the oak relative to the concentration of fruit. But I certainly got a lot more of the American oak coming through on that 2017 than.
And you can see he adjusted a little bit for that. Had a month less in oak than the 2016 did. And I think the 16 had 17 months. The 17 only had 16 months. So a little bit different. If we're talking about vintages as well, the 2015 that we're going to try, what's going to be nice to compare, because we're going to be trying the 2017 and the 2016 AALTO PS. And then we're also going to be trying 2015, which of course, again, if you love Bordeaux, Burgundy and Italian wines, Barolo Barbaresco, 2015 was also a very, very good year, but a much hotter year than 16 was. Really hot, really dry, lots of hydric stress on the vines. And again, that plays into AALTO's strengths because old vines can handle that a lot better than young wines can. So it'll be interesting to see when we compare those two together. So glad you guys like those wines. Let's take a minute if you want to have a break, go to the bathroom or anything, and we'll get our next set of 3 wines ready. So it's AALTO PS, Flight 2, glass 1, 2, and 3. So we'll give you guys a couple of minutes and then we'll come back. These AALTO PS, you can certainly give them lots of air. I definitely recommend some serious swirl time in the glass here. All right, hopefully we've got most people back now. All right, I think before we try these wines, we've got 3 AALTO PS in front of us here. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story about the first time I tried AALTO PS. It was the 2010 vintage, and I'd done a tasting of some of the top wines of Spain together, and I was incredibly impressed by the AALTO PS, especially given the price, you know, at kind of sub $150 a bottle. And we were putting this up against some wines that were well into the kind of, you know, $500 up to $1,000 a bottle. And this was one of the top wines of the tasting. I thought it was fantastic. And that was on, I think, a Wednesday night. And then what happened was on the Saturday, I was in the cellar, and a customer came into the cellar, and I was talking to him about the tasting, and he said he loved Spanish wines. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't make it. How were they?" And I was explaining about them, and he said, "How was that AALTO PS? Because I've been wanting to try that." And I said, "Oh, it was really good." Well, and then I literally looked down, and there was a bottle of the AALTO PS 2010 sitting there in the cellar. There was about no more than a third of the bottle remaining, not much, and there was no cork in it. It had been put there after the tasting on Wednesday night. So I'd been sitting all day Thursday, all day Friday, half a day on Saturday, been sitting in the cellar with no cork in it, only about a third of a bottle left. And I said to him, I said, "Oh, look, there's some there, but I mean, look, the cork's been out for 2 days on it. It's probably not going to be very good." And we gave it a try, and it was unbelievable. It was so much better than it was on the night when we first tried it. And I had given that wine probably a 6-hour decant when we'd had it on Wednesday evening. And here it was on Saturday, after an additional 2 days of air, 2.5 days of air. And it was incredible. And we both tried that together, and I was just blown away. And he said, "Look, I'm going to buy 6 bottles of that right now." And I think there was 9 left, and he brought 6, and I brought the other 3 right on the spot, because I thought, man, this is one of the best wines I've ever tried. I thought this was first growth, French Bordeaux, first growth quality for $150 a bottle. I was absolutely amazed. I'd never tasted anything that good for this sort of low price. So very, very impressive. So we've got 3 glasses in front of us here. Let's see if I can pull this up here. I'm going to just share. If you guys can see that. Mariano at the winery. And that's what we're going to be trying. So the black label, AALTO PS, 2017, 2016, and 2015. So let's start by just smelling our way across the 3 glasses. So we kind of have an idea of what we're looking at in 2017, a little bit of a lighter, difficult vintage. 2016, extremely ripe, concentrated vintage, but very elegant, very refined as well. In 2015, very, very hot, heat wave year, lots of hydric stress on the vine. So let's just smell them to start with and see what sort of differences we might be looking at. You see straight away on that 2017 AALTO PS, significantly more potent, more powerful than the AALTO 16. And then 2016 turns it up another notch. And the 2015 is just simply massive. So there's some of the very, very old vines that we're tasting with here. So let's start with that 2017, give that a taste. And there you can see a very, very old vine from La Jorda. Same with the vineyard that we just saw before when it was in full bloom. So La Jorda is the oldest vineyard that goes into this, and the oldest vines that they have there now are 90 years old. So if we look at the difference between AALTO and AALTO PS, mainly what we're looking at is the selection of vineyards, and then the age of the vines, and then the selection of oak as well that goes into it. Some of the Tempranillo there. All right, so with AALTO, we were looking at a blend across all 9 of the villages. Now we're just looking at, in this particular wine anyway, in the 2017, we're only looking at grapes from 2 plots, La Jora and La Aguilera. So if we looked at the average age of the vines in the AALTO, 2017 and 2016, they were 40 to 80 years of age. In this 2017 AALTO PS, the vines are 60 to 90 years of age. So significantly older, not from across the entire region, only from 2 plots, La Jora and La Aguilera. And we've got different oak treatment as well. So in the regular AALTO, of course, we were looking at half French oak and half American oak, and 50% of that oak was new. The rest of it was 1 to 3 year old barrels. Now we're looking at 100% French oak and 100% new barrels. Very, very impressive. Now we've got 19 months here, so even more time, 19 months and 100% new French oak in this 2017. And when you taste that wine, you would never think that was from a difficult, light vintage where most producers in the region struggled. It's an incredible wine. And I actually think this could be perhaps the most enjoyable of these 3 AALTO PS here tonight. I haven't tried these 3 together before, but given the style of this vintage and how much time AALTO PS needs, I think this could possibly be showing the best of the 3 this evening. You can see the difference in concentration, intensity, and complexity in this over the AALTO as well, though still has beautiful ripe acidity on the end as well. We're a little bit higher in alcohol on all of the AALTO PS, so I think we're looking at 15% alcohol here on all 3 of these wines versus 14.5% on the regular AALTO. They said here with the 2017, this is an AALTO PS that could be drunk on release, but after 3 to 5 years in bottle will gain complexity and balance. They think, though, you can age it for at least 10 years. And I think that's absolutely no problem whatsoever when you taste that wine. All right. Glass number 2. So glass number 2 is the AALTO PS 2016. Certainly for me and many commentators, one of the greatest vintages, at least in the last 25 years in Ribera del Duero. This is a wine that's going to need some serious aging. So let's have a look at this. Wow, and you can really see the class of the vintage in that particular wine. I mean, the concentration and intensity of the flavors is absolutely off the charts. It's insane. But somehow you can have a wine that massive and that powerful, and yet it still seems elegant. It still seems refined. It's still got all of that finesse to it as well. And that's what I felt every time I've had AALTO PS. I'm like, wow, this is a wine for people who love big, powerful wines, but somehow it never verges into over the top, never seems to verge into jammy, It never loses its structural elements as well. You can see some incredible tannin structure in behind there as well. We've had those little bottles open for a couple of hours beforehand there. I mean, I think that's a wine that you could age for at least 30 years, no problem. And from my experience with AALTO and AALTO PS, these wines just get better and better and better. Yes, you could drink that now if you wanted to, and I certainly wouldn't disagree with anybody who wanted to drink that now. I'm imagining a nice, juicy piece of sirloin straight off the barbecue with a really thick crust on it, I think would be perfect with that. But I mean, it's a wine that you can put in the cellar and literally forget about it. Those bottles of 2010 AALTO PS that I brought in the cellar that day, they're in the cellar, and I'm not intending to open those until at least another 10 years. You know, so I mean, 20 years of age, I think would probably be my, if you're spending this kind of money on AALTO PS, I think you want to cellar it at least 20 years. I think that's after the 25 year mark is when you're really going to start to see the true potential of this wine. Yes, you can drink it before then, but as you can see, the flavor profile isn't massively different from AALTO. So if you want to drink it young, drink AALTO. You know, it's much cheaper. It's probably a little bit more enjoyable when it's young. Save the AALTO PS for the long-term aging. All right, 2015. Now the 2015 is a wine I haven't had in a while. I haven't had it since it first arrived. So it's going to be really interesting to have in this lineup. And a very, very hot year. A great vintage again in Ribera del Duero, but super hot. I mean, we were hitting days of 45 degrees here. And you saw in that original video with the vineyard manager, he was talking about the huge diurnal range that they have there. I mean, they can have days where it varies 20 to 25, even 30 degrees between the daytime temperature and the nighttime temperature. And that's certainly what we were seeing in 2015. You were pushing 45 degrees during the daytime, and then it was dropping to 20 degrees or below at nighttime. And so what that means is the grapes retain the acidity in them as well. And that's one of the reasons, especially from the old vines, they're very, very good at doing that, at controlling that hydric stress. They've got the deep roots to pull the water up so that they don't shut down. And they perform very, very well in hot years like this. Wow, now you can see that 2015 is an absolute monster. Now, the vineyard selection for the 15 and the 17 is exactly the same. So the 15 and the 17 both come from those very old parcels in La Horta and La Aguilera. What I didn't mention, sorry, is the 2016 includes that third plot that we looked at as well. The 2016 has that third plot from Fresnello in there as well. But all of these ones, you're looking at an average age of between 60 and 90 years. Now that's changed a little bit over the years. That 2010, that original one that I first had, the grapes in that were from 60 to 100-year-old vines. And that was kind of in the early days. It's hard to find technical information back past earlier than about 2008, 2009, but certainly from about 2008 to 2011, all of the vines that went into AALTO PS were between 60 and 100 years. The absolute sweet spot one to have was the 2012, because the 2012 AALTO PS, all of the grapes in that from La Horta and La Aguilera were between 80 years of age and 100 years of age, so extremely old. After that, from 2013, they obviously had to replant some of those very, very old vines in La Horta. So from 2013 through to 2017 that we've got here, AALTO PS dropped back to 60 to 90-year-old vines that went into that. So a little bit of a change. And we can also see across time a little bit of a change in the oak regime, the aging as well of AALTO PS. You can see how Mariano García was experimenting a little bit, trying to get it just right. So if we looked at the 2009 AALTO PS, that had 24 months and 100% new French oak. So that is a monstrous amount of time and 100% new oak. Really, really huge. 2010, that had 22 months. The 2011, also 22 months, 100% new French oak. 2012, 2013, only 20 months. 2014 was the shortest amount of time an AALTO PS ever had in barrel, 18 months. Then the 2015-19, 2016 that we've got here, of course, 20 months. The 2017, 19 months. The 2019, 19 months. So you can see he started out with a very, very long time in barrel, gradually bringing it down year by year until he got to 2014 at 18 months and found that was probably not quite enough because the concentration of these really, really old vines, I mean, what sort of wine can you put in 100% new wood for this amount of time and not have that wood just completely swamp the fruit? So that shows the massive quality of the fruit that's going into these vines, into these wines, that it can subsume and absorb that much new French oak. So we got down to 18 months and then has started to crank it up again, 19, 20. And he seems to have settled on around about 19 months for most vintages. So certainly the three that we've got in front of you here, 2015, 19 months, 2016, 20 months, and 2017, also 19 months. So they're pretty similar. I'm just looking at your comment here, Stephen. Yeah. I mean, the difference is monstrous. Like, so I know you're a huge lover of these wines of AALTO, but to be able to taste them side by side, you kind of, I think with these wines, when you're tasting them one by one, you perhaps don't notice the vintage variations, but when you have them side by side here, you can see how clear they are. And like, I mean, that I agree with you on that 2015. It's just absolutely monstrous. It's a huge wine. If any of you guys want to unmute yourself, let's have a little bit of a chat about these three wines that we've got in front of us here. I mean, generally, if you're looking at a wine that has 100% new French oak for this amount of time, you're normally looking at a wine that's $300 a bottle to $1,000 a bottle. You're looking at some of the top second growths and first growths of Bordeaux. For the kind of price that these AALTO PSs are, I really think they're still one of the great wine bargains of the world. I think this is a wine that is only going to get more expensive over time as people start to see the track record of it aging. Remember, the first vintage was only in 1999. Now they're making somewhere around about, they started off about 200,000 bottles total at AALTO. That gradually moved up over time. Over the last 20 years, they're now making about 300,000 bottles. But AALTO PS is still very, very small production, between 10 and 12,000 bottles a year. So it's very, very small. I mean, much smaller, for example, than the first growth estates of Bordeaux. So what you're getting here for your money is incredibly impressive. And I think any of these AALTO PSs, you can serve these to somebody who loves any of the great wines of the world, and they're going to be impressed. I mean, incredible stuff. Mm-hmm. Stephen, what are your thoughts of trying them all together? Because you've been buying these wines for a little bit of time, but you probably haven't put them up side by side and tasted them next to each other.
No, exactly. I mean, as you say, I mean, you know, I've always loved these wines, but normally you're having, you know, one or two, and they always stand out Really, but then just amazing seeing the vintage variation. So I was just blown away by that 17. The difference, I mean, I like that. AALTO 17 was very light and elegant, but then I couldn't believe that the power and the concentration in the PS. Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows that value of the really, really old vines, you know. Got an interesting quote here from Mariano García, because people were talking about, well, what's the difference between Vega Sicilia and AALTO when he first started? Obviously, apart from the fact this AALTO has no Cabernet in it. And he said that Vega Sicilia is a Mercedes. AALTO is an Audi. So he very much views this as a more modern, kind of cooler, hipper version of Ribera del Duero, compared to the very old classical way that he was making wines at Vega Sicilia. Anne-Marie, Bruce, what were your thoughts on the AALTO PSs there? Have you tried the PS before?
Yeah, only once, Regan.
Only once.
Yeah, and wow, they're big stonking reds, aren't they? They really are.
They are, but they have that finesse and that elegance at the same time, I think, which is what I've always been impressed with these wines. I'm not a huge fan of wines that are just about power.
No, great. No, they're very, very good. But you were right, that 2017 was like just probably the most approachable out of the three of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas, I mean, I wouldn't even think about touching the 16 or the 15.
No.
Yeah, so these guys under, from most critics, I think they're now in the AALTOs and most lists of the top 100 wineries in the world, which is what they're wanting to do there. With AALTO PS, with the selector parcels, they don't make this wine every vintage. It kind of ends up averaging probably about 7 times a decade. So still most vintages, because Ribera del Duero has a pretty good climate for growing. They're not on the extremities. We're not talking about somewhere like a Champagne here, for example, where it's really, really difficult. But they do only make this wine when the vintage really suits, and when the power is there. I mean, AALTO PS has been voted the best red wine in Spain on a number of different lists. I think it's been voted that 6 times now. And for a wine that I think we're looking at, $160 a bottle. I still think this is one of the great kind of fine wine bargains of the world. You can buy these wines and you can put them away for 20 years and you'll never regret that in your cellar. Whereas AALTO itself, I mean, AALTO's just when you feel like some Tempranillo of this kind of quality, I think AALTO is a fantastic barbecue wine for New Zealand. When you compare the two of them, the AALTO and the AALTO PS, I mean, it's clear that PS is for long-term aging. AALTO is for drinking, probably for most people within 10 years. Yes, you can keep it longer. I mean, AALTO will do 20 years plus, no question about that. But if you're wanting to keep it more than 20 years, you probably should be buying AALTO PS. I think that's probably really the difference between the two.
And so, Regan, did you say there's no 2018 PS? Did I hear you say it was 2019 was the next vintage?
Yes, I think it jumps from 2017 to 2019. I don't think they produced a 2018.
Which will be interesting because obviously then that fruit's all going into the...
It is. It's all going into the AALTO, which we haven't landed yet, AALTO 18. It may land before Christmas, otherwise it's going to be early next year.
So you know where I'm going.
I do indeed, yeah. I mean, because I mean, AALTO itself. I mean, what's sub $80 a bottle? I mean, it's an incredible wine. You know, it's you don't need to go to the PS. I mean, the problem with tasting them here in this lineup is you get to see just how good PS are. I view AALTO as a great wine that you can put up against just about anything. and it shows well. But I mean, AALTO PS is in another level. AALTO PS deserves to be up there, I think, with some of the finest wines in the world. And you could put that in a lineup of first growths or top Barolos, Super Tuscans, or some of the top cult Cabernets out of Napa, you know, that are $500 to $2,000 a bottle, and that wine will stand with any of that competition. I was seeing Carl said maybe a lineup you should do. We did one a couple of years ago of the great Cabernets of the world, but that's a great idea, Carl. Maybe just a top reds of the world. Though I kind of want to exclude Pinot from that because it's a little bit hard to put Pinot in that. But maybe everything great except for Pinot Noir. We'll put that together. Rachel's in. Awesome, guys. Well, this was a very fun tasting to put together. As you can see, only 6 wines, pretty small tasting, but hopefully you guys are glad that you joined this tasting. Originally, when I had this plan, there was going to be another wine in here. There was going to be the 2014 with the AALTO in that as well. And then COVID hit and lockdown hit, and people started to buy a lot of these wines, and a lot of the wines I had kind of earmarked in my mind for this tasting started to disappear. So it was a mad scramble to kind of put some of the last of these together. But thank you guys for joining me tonight. This is a real pleasure to host this tasting for you guys and to try these wines again. It's been, God, a long time since I've had 3 AALTO PS in front of me here, and this just reminds me of how great this wine really, really is. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Rachel and Marie, for joining us. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tasting. As you can see, with level 2.5 and Auckland extending, we've had to change our schedule around a little bit. But there was meant to be the Bordeaux 2017 walk around tasting this weekend. That's been put out a little bit. There's a couple that we've changed to virtual. I've got the Bordeaux 2017 second growth tasting next Thursday. That was going to be an in-person tasting. But we're going to change that to virtual because there's just, we're going to get too close to the end of the year, and there's going to be too many tastings to get in. I know a lot of you guys want to drink some champagne as well, and there's just not going to be enough time. So the second growth tasting next week will be a virtual tasting. So I've still got some room on that. That's going to be pretty awesome. We've got, Le Fleur Petrus in there, some of the top wines of the left bank, Cos d'Estanal, that kind of stuff in there. It's going to be really, really good. And as Rachel said, yeah, I really enjoy these virtual tastings. I think they're really good. Certainly as a customer, when I've been on the other end of this and not talking, it's great. I can sit here at home. I can enjoy the wines in my own time. It's easy to hear the presenter. It's easy to see the pictures and the maps and stuff. And I think the format is really, really good. So yes, don't worry. Even once things are back to normal, if that ever happens, whatever that means, we will certainly be continuing with the virtual tastings in some form or another. There'll be some in-person tastings, there'll be some virtual tastings, because we've also got a lot of customers all around the country as well who can't attend tastings in Auckland or Wellington, and we've got a lot of those guys joining us on these as well, and that's really great to see. It's really great to have some customers who I've been selling wine to for a long time actually seeing them at a tasting because they can't make it in person.
Yeah, awesome tasting, Regan. I love the format, and yeah, I hope it continues. Thank you.
Awesome, cool. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. I'm really, really glad that you guys could join me tonight for this. Nice little small tasting, but with some awesome wines. All right, thank you so much, guys. We'll see you soon.